What if the man responsible for 2 murders had already been known to police? What if there had been arrests, convictions, warnings, going back years? And what if, despite all of that, he was allowed to keep walking free? This is the story of Simon Levy, a convicted sexual predator from North London, whose crimes escalated into the murders of 2 women within the span of a single year. Today, the question isn't only what Simon Levy did, it's whether the system that was supposed to stop him ever really tried. Simon Levy was 40 years old. He lived on a quiet residential street in Tottenham, North London, Beaufoy Road, blind in one eye, softly spoken, the kind of man neighbors might not look at twice. But Levy was not a stranger to the criminal justice system. He was a registered sex offender, already on the radar of the Metropolitan Police, long before the murders that would eventually make headlines around the world. And here's the detail that would later become one of the most damning parts of this entire case. In 2024, the Met had assessed Levy's risk level and downgraded him from high risk to medium risk. 1 year later, 2 women would be dead. The first attack came in January 2025 in Haringey, North London. A woman was raped, subjected to serious violence, left with a broken collarbone. She survived, but only barely. And she told police something critical in the aftermath. She knew where her attacker lived. That single piece of information could have changed everything. But she wasn't formally interviewed. Not right away. In fact, according to what would later emerge, she wasn't properly interviewed until after Simon Levy had already killed twice. 2 more women were about to lose their lives, while the woman who survived was still waiting to be heard. 2 months later, in March 2025, police were called to a largely abandoned block of flats on the Aylesbury estate in Walworth, southeast London. Inside the stairwell, they found a woman, unresponsive. She could not be saved. Her name was Carmenza Valencia-Trujillo. She was 53 years old, originally from Colombia. Her family would later describe her as a big character, full of life, a woman who loved salsa dancing, who had just become a grandmother the year before. At first, a post-mortem examination couldn't establish how she died. Investigators had no clear cause of death, and without one, there was no case strong enough to bring murder charges. Weeks later, in April, Simon Levy was arrested on suspicion of her murder, and then he was released, bailed, while the investigation continued. Under English law, the threshold to charge someone with murder is extremely high. Without conclusive evidence, police say this was standard procedure. But standard procedure would carry a devastating cost, because Carmenza would not be the only woman Simon Levy left behind that year. 5 months passed. Then, in the early hours of Sunday, August 24, 2025, police were called to a car park off Tottenham High Road. A woman lay unresponsive. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Her name was Sheryl Wilkins. She was 39 years old, a mother of 4. Her family would later say she was a beautiful soul, deeply loved, and missed every single day. Once again, a post-mortem couldn't determine exactly how she died. But this time, investigators had something they didn't have in March: hundreds of hours of CCTV footage across Tottenham, and the patience to go through every second of it. On September 4th, during CCTV inquiries, officers using facial recognition technology identified a man near the scene where Sheryl Wilkins was found. It was Simon Levy. The footage told its own story. It showed him following Sheryl, hood pulled up, approaching her, the 2 of them disappearing behind the wall of a car park for nearly 50 minutes. Then, only one figure walked away. Sheryl's body was discovered roughly 5 hours later. Levy was arrested the very next day, September 5th, and once he was in custody, investigators began asking a much larger question. Was this the first time? Detectives started re-examining unsolved cases with a similar pattern. That search led them straight back to Carmenza Valencia-Trujillo. New evidence, a pattern police could no longer ignore. On September 7th, Levy was formally charged with Sheryl Wilkins' murder. On November 20th, he was charged with Carmenza Valencia-Trujillo's murder too. 2 women, 5 months apart, 1 man connected to both. Simon Levy stood trial at the Old Bailey, the most famous criminal court in England. He denied everything: the murder of Carmenza Valencia-Trujillo, the murder of Sheryl Wilkins, the rape and violent assault of the surviving woman from January 2025. Over 5 weeks, prosecutors laid out their case, CCTV evidence tracing his movements before and during both killings, forensic evidence linking him to both scenes, and testimony describing an escalating pattern of sexual violence against women across North and Southeast London. The defense pushed back, but the evidence was overwhelming. On Friday, August 7, 2026, the jury returned its verdict. Simon Levy was found guilty of murdering Carmenza Valencia-Trujillo, guilty of murdering Sheryl Wilkins, guilty of 2 counts of rape, guilty of grievous bodily harm with intent, and the non-fatal strangulation of the surviving woman from January 2025. 2 murders, multiple sexual offenses. One verdict that confirmed what investigators had feared for over a year, that Simon Levy was not a man who had simply lost control once. He was a predator whose violence had been building for years, against women who were never given the chance to stop him in time. This is where the case becomes something bigger than one man's crimes. Because Simon Levy was not unknown to authorities. He had prior convictions. He had already been flagged as a registered sex offender. And in 2024, the year before he killed twice, the Metropolitan Police had reassessed his risk level and moved him down the list, from high risk to medium risk. Then came January 2025, and a survivor who told police she knew exactly where her attacker lived, information that wasn't acted on with urgency. Then came April 2025, when Levy was arrested over Carmenza's death and released, because the legal bar for a murder charge couldn't yet be met. Then came August, and Sheryl Wilkins. In the aftermath, the Metropolitan Police referred itself to the Independent Office for Police Conduct, acknowledging concerns over exactly how Levy's risk had been assessed and managed in the years leading up to the murders. It was, in the Met's own words through the investigation, a case where the consequences of those decisions were nothing short of catastrophic. Detective Chief Inspector Neil John, who led the investigation, said Levy's actions had cut short 2 lives, and that the thoughts of his team remained with the victims' families. But for those families, an apology from an institution doesn't undo what happened. It only confirms what they already knew, that this didn't have to happen at all. On Wednesday, August 12, 2026, Simon Levy stood once more at the Old Bailey, this time for sentencing. Presiding Judge Mark Lucraft KC laid out, in detail, the devastating impact of Levy's crimes on the families left behind. Then he handed down the most severe sentence available under English law, a whole life order. It is exceptionally rare. Only just over 70 people in the whole of England and Wales are currently serving one. It means exactly what it sounds like. No minimum term, no parole hearing, no possibility of release, ever. Simon Levy will die in prison. In the courtroom, Sheryl Wilkins' sister, Lindsay Hicks, read a victim impact statement. She told Levy directly that he had, in her words, destroyed our lives, and that the pain of losing her sister would never fully heal. No sentence, however severe, can give these families back what they lost. The Simon Levy case will likely be remembered for 2 things: the horror of what he did, and the uncomfortable questions about what could have stopped him sooner. How does a man with a documented history of sexual violence get downgraded on a risk assessment the year before he kills twice? Why did a survivor's own knowledge of her attacker's address not lead to a faster investigation? And how many warning signs have to appear before the system treats a pattern as a pattern instead of a series of isolated incidents? The Independent Office for Police Conduct's review into how Levy was assessed and managed is still ongoing. Whatever it finds won't bring Carmenza Valencia-Trujillo or Sheryl Wilkins back. But it may determine whether the next warning sign gets missed too, or whether, this time, someone finally listens. Simon Levy will spend the rest of his life in prison. That much is certain. Carmenza Valencia-Trujillo, a grandmother, a dancer, a woman her children called full of life, is gone. Sheryl Wilkins, a mother of 4, remembered by her family as a beautiful soul, is gone. And a third woman survives, carrying the physical and emotional weight of what was done to her, and the knowledge that if she had been believed sooner, 2 other women might still be alive. True crime stories are never really about the person who committed the crime. They're about the people who were taken from us. The families left behind to read statements in courtrooms, and, sometimes, they're about the failures that happened long before a single crime scene was ever taped off. The Simon Levy case is a reminder of exactly that. When warning signs are missed, the cost is measured in human lives. What do you think about this case? Could earlier intervention have prevented these murders? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more carefully researched true crime coverage, subscribe and turn on notifications. This is True Crime Vault. Until the next case, stay safe.